borderlines are treatable.
Anybody's treatable who wants treatment.
Welcome to Peggy's Recovery Corner. This is a recovery podcast. We talk to lots of different people that come on our podcast from all walks of life, people that are recovering from addiction, from alcoholism, from mental health. Many of our guests are people, obviously, that have overcome their afflictions and their addictions. Often I talk about bringing on professionals too, and I've actually had Gina on before when we were just kind of a pandemic skeleton style of podcast, but and also my team has told me a lot. We got to get therapists on. We got to get people that are professionals on. And Gina stands out to me. She is a star in our community. She helps a lot of people. I've known her for years. I know her husband. You're a therapist.
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to the corner.
Trade.
By trade.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's a very pretty
marriage
corner.
and family therapist.
Yeah, the license is marriage and family therapist. Okay. The degree is clinical psychology.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just want to talk a little bit about my relationship with you and how I know you. You obviously, you and your husband have had a place called Harmony Heals for many years.
Since 1994.
Okay, and it's
many years. Yeah,
it's right now. It's in South Orange County.
Yeah, it's in Laguna Hills. It's an outpatient counseling center. So anything mental health, any kind of therapy or therapist that would, that you would require, we got covered.
Okay,
yeah.
And then obviously you have many different types of patients that come through. Those that deal with codependency, those that deal with borderline personality disorder, many different disorders, and you get to treat or have gotten to treat many of them over the years.
I've been blessed to treat everything. So I've not missed. I don't believe there's a diagnosis that I haven't really worked with, at least on some level, whether it was from my internship all the way through to now at this ripe, mature age of mine. But I started off in psychiatric care. So I was actually working in hospital facilities where we used to have locked units even. So I've worked with schizophrenia and sociopathic, clients as well. And then we have all the mood disorders, which is your depression and your anxiety. And we have, OCD and things like that are more familiar to lay people. And then in the last probably 15 or more years, addiction became, an area that I had always worked with because I always work with trauma. So really my absolute love and specialty is in trauma, but all of those things fall under it. And I always say there is no addiction without trauma.
Okay. And what did we want to call the topic of this particular episode today?
I told you and I already forgot what it was.
You're not your trauma.
You're not your trauma.
You're not your trauma.
You're not your trauma.
And we were talking, before we even started recording, we talked about narrative therapy, and I do know a center that actually they specialize in narrative therapy. And you had said that most therapy is based around narrative.
Yeah.
Rebuilding your narrative, redoing it.
If you think about you're going into somebody's history and you're identifying what are the root causes of where they come from, what happened to them. You're going to the beginning of the story. And I think I mentioned it in my book, shameless plug. I'm an author too, but I mentioned in my book about writing a story, and it's called Healing as a Love Story, because you can't start and get to the end if you don't start at the beginning.
Right.
So the beginning is all the childhood stuff. And people think therapists are obsessed with going to your childhood and blaming your parents and all that. Yeah, no, it's not that. Is that we want to understand fully your story. And narrative therapy is about what happens when you understand your story from the beginning, when there's sociopathy or there's some pathology or addiction, there's trauma, there's abuse. You start to identify with that as you. And so you build a personality around, I am this, and this is stigmatized, and this is marginalized, and this is less than. And so I don't have a strong ego. I don't have good self-esteem. And so coming from the beginning of that story, you start to create this persona. And narrative is really about rewriting it, right? And I think all therapy is about rewriting it. Look, that's where you were. That's where you've been. That's not who you are. If you can separate yourself from, I am not depression. I am not a drug addict. That's that's something that I do. And so it's really helping clients to understand and navigate through the story so that they can see some of these things happen to me. That doesn't mean they are me. And that means I can be something other than what I've been.
Okay, so then let's take it back more on a personal
Take it
level.
back.
Self-disclosure, being a person that you, to my understanding, there was never any substance abuse or addiction.
No, there was no overt any abuse in my home whatsoever.
But growing up,
And yet,
and
right?
yet, yes,
There was a lot of messages. And so that's the part of why I like the CBT aspect of the therapy that I do, is because it's all about understanding the messages that you give yourself and reframing those, especially when they're very negative. And I had this weird mix of parents. I had, first of all, they're Latinos, they're Cubans.
yes,
And I got a whole lot of that.
yes,
And they're, one was the glass is always half full, and the other one was the glass is always half empty, which was very confusing for me as the child.
right,
I was always trying to lean into one or the other. One caused tremendous amount of anxiety, one gave a lot of freedom. But the freedom was the father. And so my father worked a lot. And so although he was there in my formative years, he's not there that much. And so then it's all mom. And mom is always the glass is half empty. She's always worried. She's always anxious. So I internalized a lot of those messages. You're not going to make it. There's things to fear. People are not good. Blah, blah, blah. Like, oh my God. So I received a lot of messages about less than, about being less than.
okay.
Yeah.
Were you the youngest, the oldest, the middle? What?
I was the baby.
The baby.
Me and my brother.
Yeah.
And my brother's 3 years older. And my brother is in long-term recovery from his addiction.
Okay.
Woo-hoo, shout out to Paul.
Yeah.
And I think he's got probably 35 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. So I came by addiction, honestly, is what I tell people. Oh, it wasn't in my home. Overtly, I said, right? So throughout my childhood, my brother starts using when we're both teenagers. And then his progresses. I tried to follow him. So the other addiction that I picked up was codependency.
I was going to say, addiction doesn't always have to be chemical
It's not.
or substance.
No, my mother's was shopping. That's why I say nothing's overt, because it wasn't clear that there was anything that you would ever call abuse or trauma if you identified it the way that clinicians identify it based on the diagnostic books that we utilize, right?
Right.
It doesn't fall under the category of disorder. And yet there's all these subtle things happening, you know? So my mom fixes feelings by shopping. So I can remember having a really intense shopping addiction in my early 20s, to the point of I'm going to go shop when I don't have money to pay rent.
Right.
That's an addiction.
Sure.
You know, and I couldn't even identify it because I'm like, this is what you do when you're feeling bad, because that's what I was taught, you know.
Sure.
My brother starts coping with substances. Well, I hang out with him. I start using substances because I'm like, I love my brother. I want to hang with my brother. I want his attention.
Right.
I'm not getting what I need from mom. Dad's not around.
So I'm gonna go
I'm
do
going
this.
to try to get it from brother.
Yeah.
So I go with brother, and I cannot keep up with him. Because it becomes progressive for him, right? So then I'm like, this is not working for me.
Right.
I can't do it. And so I wasn't able to, I didn't have the ism, so to speak.
Right.
I didn't have that genetic, component that got unleashed in me, like it got unleashed in my brother. So mine went into the codependency.
So break down codependency. How, I mean, listen, there's a lot of variables for codependency.
Yes, there are. And you know it's not a disorder, right? So let's make that clear.
Okay. And why?
It's not in the DSM. The Diagnostic Statistical Manual is what we use to diagnose clients, which I never, ever, 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 ever did with clients. Never told them, never cared about it. I want to make that very clear, that one of the fundamental reasons we do that now is because of insurance.
Oh, okay.
Because we have to give them a diagnosis. I never revealed it to a client unless I thought it would serve them to overcome something. And then I would tell them, you understand that you fall under this
Okay.
diagnosis. Yeah.
So if codependency is not a
It's not.
disorder, what is it?
It's a maladaptive behaviors. So it's characteristics and traits of maladaptive behaviors. So I've learned to behave in a certain way to cope that is not healthy. and not functional. And my addiction is to the addict or alcoholic, right?
Okay, so that's sometimes codependency could be being addicted to somebody else, a human.
Who's addicted to substances. That is the original definition of it.
Okay.
And now it's been expanded to what I said to you is maladaptive, which I don't know if I read that or that's a Gina thing, but it's, how I learned to cope with what I wasn't dealing with emotionally. So if I wasn't going to act out and drink like my brother and I wasn't going to shop like my mother, what was I going to do? I was going to fix you. So then we all feel better so that I can feel better.
Right.
So what people don't understand about codependency, it's very self-serving.
Sure.
And it's all about control. It looks very altruistic.
Sure.
And it is not. Which bothered me when I found out because I thought I'm so nice.
I found it out too, and I did not like it. And I was told I was codependent, and I thought that.
You're like, no, wait.
Well, I was in Siamak's place, and there was another person that he brought in saying they were primary codependent.
Yeah.
And then.
And you're like, what?
Well, I thought, okay, that's their problem.
Right.
But then one day he said, everyone in this room is codependent. I'm like, me?
Absolutely.
What are you talking about? Me? He said,
Yeah.
Pej, most addicts and alcoholics are codependent.
Codependent. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, CMA.
And I did not believe him. God rest his soul.
God rest his soul.
I know that he sent me to a CODA meeting
Yeah.
to try
did
to
you like that?
to figure it out for myself. And when I went there, I hated it because
Me
he was
too.
absolutely right. But when I say it has a lot of variables, like yes, it is very self-serving, and sometimes codependents don't like to hear when you tell them that it's a very selfish act.
Right.
They don't want to hear that because they truly feel in their heart of hearts that they're helping.
Yes.
And they're saving.
It is their
and
only motivation.
It's their role to fix.
Yes.
And really,
No,
they're
it's not.
harming, like in most cases.
Enabling, as we know in the field of addiction, it's enabling behavior. But for the codependent, they can't be free of it until they understand and comprehend, I'm doing this for me, not you.
It's amazing too. I have a lot of, I help a lot of people get into treatment. I help a lot of people, along their path and journey to get into certain wherever they need to go to take care of their problem.
Right.
And often I'll talk to parents, and the parents that it's clear as day, the ones that are codependent. When I even bring up the word codependency, they'll say something along the lines of, "Oh, you know what? Last time she was in treatment, one of the counselors called me that, and I guess I've actually heard that about me." And I'm like, so you've heard it about you. Do you believe it about you?
No.
No, they don't want to believe it. And some people actually, they know. They'll say, yes. I know I'm an enabler.
Yes.
I know I'm a helicopter mom. I was
Right.
labeled that too.
Right.
All these
Right.
different things. But in your case, as a codependent, when did they call it codependency back then?
Oh my God, no. Yeah, it starts to show up, I think, early 80s. So, I don't think I heard about it until probably the 90s.
Melody Beattie wrote that book.
It's like Melody Beattie and Pia Melody and
Yeah.
all the melodies.
Yeah.
Claudia Black. They all those were like the mentors, right, for me of all the things that I learned about addiction and codependency was really through those women. And John Bradshaw, who was unbelievably wonderful human being. So yeah, they talked about it and they made it be known because I remember just struggling so hard with as a young intern going, how come I identify so well with these clients that have either are in addiction or they are in abusive relationships
Right.
or they have severe trauma. And I'm like, what is going on? Like I feel so comfortable with them and I identify with them emotionally. I was not comprehending that my behavior was codependent.
Why did you get in the field?
It started when I was 12.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
Why did you want to get in the helping field?
It's very interesting. I talk about it in the book, and really this is my first recollection of this is before it becomes codependent, it was always a knowing in me.
Yeah.
And I always had a desire to help people. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want to make it very, very clear to those who are suffering with codependency or those that are hearing us say that helping is not healthy. That's absolutely not true. The line between being a helper and being altruistic and being a codependent is the codependent is now stuck in a pattern of behavior that they're making themselves sick with. I can't even function unless I'm doing for you. And I don't know how to do for myself. I don't know how to put myself at the front of the line. I don't know how to ask for what I need. I don't know how to express my own emotions, but I'll help you fix all of yours and do for you. So then I feel better, but I'm never going to own or identify myself.
No self-care.
Right. And so it causes self-esteem issues, it causes depression, it causes anxiety, it causes all these other things. So for me, at 12 years old, I had the good gene of just wanting to help. It just felt good to help people. And so as a little kid, it was the 70s. I'm dating myself. So we had the long cord phones that are attached. These kids today, they have no clue what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
In order to talk, you had to take the phone from the kitchen. You had to walk all the way to your bedroom and close the door.
Yeah.
And your mama knew you were on the phone, but that was your privacy, okay?
Yes. Wasn't no cell phones
No, there was no cell phones. So I used to sneak the phone in my room at night, and kids from school, from band in particular or something is what I remember, but kids from school would call me for advice, and they're asking me stuff. I'm like, I haven't even done any of these things yet. Like they're already starting to do stuff, and I'm still the good kid. Like, la, la, la. And I'm like, what?
Right.
But I'm giving them advice. And I thought, well, this is kind of cool. So it was band. The band director nicknamed me the Shrink. And so it stuck. And then I remember watching the Charlie Brown's.
Yes. They had that the booth.
And it was Lucy in the booth, and she spelled psychiatrist wrong.
Yes.
Psychiatrist or something, and she spelled it backwards, and it was 5 cents. And I go, I can get paid to do this? Yes.
Yes.
I was very excited but it stayed. And the minute I had that thought, it's like I knew that's it. That's what I'm doing. And thank God. For many different reasons, that's been my life's purpose. Because you have to have that to stick around on this planet. You got to find it. And so many people struggle most of their lives. And a lot of addiction, I think, is a loss of finding purpose and meaning in life.
Right.
And you get lost in that. And so thank God I had that, because I always had that. So that drive was always in me to follow that, God-given purpose or whatever it was. And then the sickness around why I wanted to be a therapist comes out later, because I go into a very sick, codependent first marriage and become very ill in that. And I say to people, it almost killed me. And what I mean by that was I would have killed myself. It got so bad. And so if you don't think it's life-threatening, it is, because you can put yourself...
Was he an addict or an alcoholic?
Of course.
Yeah, of course.
But I didn't know that, right? I didn't know that because I wasn't clear yet when somebody was sober, but they weren't working any kind of a program of recovery or spirituality.
Yeah.
That I was still dealing with an addict.
With their sickness.
Yeah. So I'm young. We got married at 21, which was ridiculous. So I'm just putting that out for all you youngins.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. You don't know yourself. I mean, there's those beautiful people that get married from high school. I have a few friends. I don't know how they did it. And they're still married in their 50s and 60s. I'm like, God bless you. You are the rare exception.
Sure.
But you change so much through those formative years. And so very young, he at that time was using substances enough to bother me, not enough that I knew that he's addicted or that I would have called it that, because I don't think I even identified that in my brother. So how could I have, right? And I'm not in that part of my schooling yet to catch on. So I'm like, yeah, we can do this, but I'm not going to marry you if you keep smoking pot. So that was his drug of choice. And then he's like, okay, I'll quit. So he quits cold turkey. So years later, after I divorce him and I'm in therapy, all of a sudden it's like, it hits me. I'm like, oh my God, he was a dry addict. He had no coping.
Sure.
And he lost his coping and he was pretty pissed. And I'm like, oh, no wonder I was the target, because I took away his best friend.
Yes.
Not that I did, but he made a choice, me or the best friend. By choosing me, he was real pissed off about it. And I got to pay for that.
Yes.
For the next
he let you know.
4 years. He let me know.
Yeah.
And I'm not putting that together, obviously, at 20. I'm trying to fix him. I'm being codependent, fix him.
You're immersed in your codependency.
Oh, my God. And he becomes suicidal at some point. I'm like, somebody's going to die in this relationship, him or me.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Isn't that fun?
I'll tell you.
Not do that in your 20s. Like, go explore Europe and put a backpack on. Jesus Christ, see the world. Like, man. But the whole time me thinking, why? Why? And that's all over my book. One of the chapters is why me.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, why not me? And it's later that I'll identify the first Latina who sat in my office that wanted to get a divorce. And I went, bam, I have something for you. And I recognized every part of my story was a story that would help serve someone else. So in a way, it was still helpful.
I understand
And
that
it had
completely.
a purpose and a meaning,
Yeah.
you know, and I needed to remember that every time because the story would keep going. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you know, as time progressed and you got into the working field and the many different types of people that would come with
Mental health issues.
with mental health issues, some disorders and some weren't disorders.
Right. Apparently.
Some more maladaptive
It's going to wind
behaviors.
up in there, you know.
I'm sure it will eventually when the DSM-6 comes
Yeah.
out. But down the line, you know, I'm sure you've watched it. I've watched it. We see things like borderline personality disorder. Again, this is something that we didn't see in the 80s called that.
I mean, not that I recall.
Not that I recall either.
And I don't, it's hard for me to think that far back to when I was in school because I don't think I saw the DSM until that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual again.
Yes.
But I didn't see that until I was an intern, and that happened later, much later when I was out of school. I don't remember. Of course, you hear about sociopaths and you
Sure.
heard about narcissists, and you did hear about substance use disorders, and you did hear about mood disorders, and you heard about autism, you know. And so there were certain things, pervasive developmental disorders in children and oppositional defiant and
Sure.
stuff like that. I don't remember borderline. It was
Can you
probably always
break
in there.
down what is borderline personality disorder?
Borderline. It's a great song by Madonna that I can't sing, or I would.
Yeah.
So borderline personality, what's difficult about this is that it has now become so stigmatized, and lay people's term, even lay people know this one because they're like, ooh, that's bad if somebody has that.
Sure.
So I want to just share with all of those beautiful people that have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder or are diagnosing themselves is that it's one of the disorders, okay? It is treatable. The reason that people have difficulty with it is they say it's a pervasive developmental disorder, which means it's going to last your whole life. It's not just going to go away. It's not going to be like the codependency is, where if you just address it and then you just follow these little steps, you can then be free of this codependent or addictive behavior. It doesn't work that way with borderline personality. It's much more entrenched, much like narcissistic personality disorder and the other personality disorders, right? And so borderline personality disorder is basically an attachment disorder. And what I understand about it is that you just did not attach in your infancy, in your childhood. There wasn't that bond and that connection with a primary caretaker. And not having that primary love object that you connected with and received love from and understood that you were loved creates these other maladaptive behaviors that look not dissimilar to codependency, but they've now become so entrenched in you that you can't identify it as it's a me problem.
Right.
And what happens with the borderline personality is they attach very quickly and they hang on for dear life. And rejection is the key with a borderline, is if they feel any sense of rejection, it's very threatening, they get very defensive, and then they push away. So then it's what we used to call passive aggressive, what y'all people now call gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a very interesting topic because, and I know that last time that you and I got together and I talked a little bit about my own experience. That, like, I had no idea what borderline personality disorder was.
Okay.
Why
would you?
I was dating a person where, and I remember that you knew who Sue was too, the Indian lady that did the
yes, of course.
psychodramas.
Yeah.
I worked in a treatment center. I was dating a person that also worked at the treatment center. It was the honeymoon era was magnificent. Beautiful.
As it always
Everything was
is.
great. And then it came down to every so often we would have these arguments, and the arguments were fierce. I mean, to the point where
Oh, yeah.
I remember actually going and asking Sue, "Can I please come in your office and just talk to you?" She said, "What?" And sure, come on in. I went in, and as we talked, she said, "It sounds like she has borderline personality disorder." I'm like, what is that? last week, my friend Billy told me that his girlfriend
really?
has that.
Oh.
And now you're saying it. Spirit of the
be
universe,
true.
something's telling me something here. And so she said, do you feel like sometimes you're going crazy? And I said, absolutely. She makes me feel like I'm losing my mind. And she guilt trips me and tells me these things that I have no idea. Like, I almost start to like contemplate.
You feel like
I
it
think
might be
maybe
true.
It might be
and
true.
you start buying into
Right.
it. Absolutely.
But over a period of time, so then I started dating other women, right? And what I started noticing is that they all had very similar patterns. And I come to find that some of them were actually diagnosed as borderline personality disorder. The original one herself told me later on.
She did.
Oh, BPD. I was diagnosed with that like 10 years ago. I'm like, really? You even got
Thank you.
You even know the break, like
She knew it. She knew how to break it down.
the breakdown of it, right? Like,
The criteria for BPD. Yeah.
but then there was other people that I would date too that they didn't have to be diagnosed.
Right.
The writing was on the wall.
There you go.
And then I got to a point where I was like, wait a second, I got to get some books on this stuff. Like,
yeah.
so I got
what am I doing? That
right. So I got this book.
attracting
I hate you, don't leave me.
Yes.
And I read that.
Perfect.
Oh my god! Or the other one was something to like walking on eggshells. Anyway,
Yes.
so I'm reading these books, and after a little while, I was thinking like, maybe I have BPD, right? Because just reading this stuff.
Well, I told you some of the codependency is in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The way I was raised, being in a family system, and what you were describing your Cuban heritage, like a lot of that stuff was happening
Very similar.
half glass, glass half full, half empty, was in our Persian.
A lot of expectations. You have to meet the parents
Right.
in order to receive love. Isn't just given; it's a standard you have to meet, and then it's given. And that was what really messed me up, that I didn't understand. And that's why when I went on my journey and I start redefining trauma and coming against all these definitions, I redefined it as anytime your emotional needs didn't go met, you experienced a trauma, and that trauma is abandonment.
Sure.
You're not there for me. You're not loving me. You're not seeing me. You're not hearing me. I'm a caricature because if I mold myself into what you want, then I get love. Well, why wouldn't I be codependent? If that's the message, then I'm going to do that to get love.
Right.
And by the time I'm marrying the, first nightmare is I'm desperate for that now.
Right.
I'm desperate for that love now, that I'm willing to put myself in unsafe situations to get it, right?
Right.
And that's, insane, but that is, what starts to happen. Now, with you or I or codependent, there is reasoning still. There's definitely remorse in place. Certainly, when I would get called out on my behavior, I'd be so full of shame and remorse. And we can't identify it. We're just scared to let it go because it's a control issue, for God's sakes. It's the only thing I can control. I can't control anything or anyone else, right? But when you understand it in that manner, that's the difference between the borderline who cannot comprehend that these behaviors are toxic and that if you change your thinking and shift this behavior, you'll get the result you want. They can't comprehend that. They can't let go of that. They have to be taught. And there's a lot of conditioning and there's a lot of CBT happens to work very well with the borderline personality. But otherwise, they get stuck in that. It's entrenched behavior, much like the addict that keeps using and going, it's not that bad. It's not that, I'm all right. I'm not losing anything. They're losing everything and they don't see it. That's what happens with the borderline is they lose everyone. Ultimately, they can't hang on to anybody as desperately as
It's
they
very
try.
interesting that you say that because I was starting to question myself and thinking, am I just like magnetized? Like, what is it? It seems like every woman.
It's the abuse. It's the wounded woman that you're attracting.
A friend of mine told me in psychological terms, there's a thing called the dance, like where they draw you in and they spit you out. And that's what it was feeling like. Also, there was one relationship I had where, and again, I asked her like 3 different times, have you ever been diagnosed with anything? Because something's going on here. She was on a lot of medication. Sometimes she would take herself off and go up and down. I never called the suicide hotline until I dated this woman.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like,
there you go.
Because she told me she had a plan and this and that.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, a lot of stuff happened, but you're right, because she ended up alone. And like,
Yeah.
I don't block a lot of people in all areas of my life.
And you wind up doing that.
I
with
had
a
to block
borderline.
this individual. She became so dangerous. I mean, I ended up getting in trouble.
Yeah.
for something she did, and it was crazy. And this is in
Yes.
recovery.
Yeah.
In
Wow.
recovery,
Scary,
right?
but
Like,
true.
but it was a learning experience. And I realized later, I thought to myself, Pej, you can go around and diagnose people in your own head and think something's wrong with them, but you're the
Right.
choice maker. Like, you made the choice.
Right. You're stepping into it.
Those green, like all the red
With
flags
your
you
boots
painted
on.
green, right?
Yeah.
And you decided to stay with that, even when you saw the writing on the wall.
Right.
So what? Maybe you want to question what your motives were, or what you were really
Absolutely.
thinking.
Absolutely.
But again, working in addiction treatment and mental health treatment, as you mentioned earlier, this is what I saw a lot of, and it saddened me because I didn't believe it. A lot of professionals, as mentioned, what you said earlier, if you saw someone that was a new patient that would come into their milieu, they'd say, and has borderline, which immediately a lot of
It's a
them
negative
would think
label.
we're not going to be
not
able to help them.
treatable.
Not treatable. Is this true?
No, that's unkind to say.
Yeah, borderlines are treatable.
Anybody's treatable who wants treatment.
How about this? Narcissism? Narcissists?
Narcissists can be treated. Now, they have to want treatment.
Right.
Can you get a narcissist to go and admit that they need treatment?
Not
No.
that much. No.
Right. And so what makes it difficult is them not choosing. I'm sure there's tons of clinicians and therapists out there who will, argue this with me. But here's my thing. I have to believe everybody's treatable. Then why am I sitting in this seat? Then I hold no hope for you. You already don't have hope. So why would I further put you in a place where you can't believe that healing is possible for you? Because imagine the borderline coming in and recognizing, I don't know what it is, I don't know what I do, but everyone leaves me. Can you imagine the pain of that? Your whole life?
Your whole life, yeah.
And to be able to admit that and to say, this hurts, this is painful, I have to believe there's a way out, because then there wasn't a way out for me then. You know what I'm saying? So I don't buy into that. I understand it's difficult to treat. So we are confusing difficult with treatable. And here's the problem is we label everybody, which is why I said what I said in the beginning about diagnosing for the sake of insurance versus why does the client even need to know? In one of the cases, borderline personality is a good one for them to know, because they don't understand. So they're one you get to spell it out with, just like with a narcissist, and a histrionic personality disorder is another one.
Sure.
If you spell it out for them and you show them the symptoms, they understand, as you know this phraseology, they don't have a terminal case of uniqueness.
Yes.
Because a borderline has that trait of thinking I'm terminally unique.
Yeah.
So when you show them that and you show them the symptom checklist, they're like, if this isn't a book that millions of people see and get diagnosed, then I'm not unique. These problems are not unique to me, which means there might be a solution. I've been thinking I'm so unique, so there's no way to solve this, right? But by putting it in that context, they can start to understand, well, then maybe I am treatable, right? And so they're one of the cases where I would break it down for them and I would show them
I like that.
But other than that, when they come in, I don't like to label anything. It does them such a disservice.
Sure. So the majority of humanity
Has something.
has trauma.
Well, we have issues. Who
The
doesn't
majority
have
of human,
issues?
if not all
They
humans.
sang a song about it. Right, another song.
Now, when it all boils down, I mean, let's say somebody is
People get upset 'cause I
diagnosed
put it like that.
narcissist.
Right, they have trauma.
Trauma. It's gotta be. It's gotta stem
at the
from
root
some kind
cause
of
of everything is
There's
trauma,
trauma.
because the story always starts at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And so this environment with trauma versus this one without, of course, we're going to have a different product, right?
Right.
The end result is going to be very different. And the issue is identifying what is trauma for you. Why do I call it trauma? Because if you went from, I had a pretty decent childhood, I never got abused, nobody hit me, there wasn't any sexual abuse, there wasn't, addiction, active addiction, blah, blah, blah. Why am I attracting borderlines?
Yeah.
You got to figure something out. And it's like, there was some trauma for you. Something traumatized you enough, made you feel less than enough times that you went out to continue to draw and attract what you felt about yourself, which is I'm less than.
Right.
So I'm going to attract less than, right? That's trauma. That's traumatic.
Have you ever had somebody that's come to you that was diagnosed with narcissism that overcame their narcissism?
I'll get in trouble for naming names, not literally. I have a very dear person in my life that likes to call himself the compassionate narcissist. You might be familiar with him.
Yes.
And he has a little blog about it. So yeah, that's my husband. So of course a codependent would draw to a narcissist.
Yeah.
And so there's a very fine line there. My father was very similar to my husband, and what I say is they have features. So when someone doesn't have the full-blown diagnosis,
Yeah.
they have some features of it, but they don't have the disorder, right? Because of the compassion, because of the ability to have emotional feelings for others, because of the remorse. That's what distinguishes and separates a really big ego, from the narcissist.
It's so interesting that you say that. So I was always a fan of Marianne Williamson. I love reading her books.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
I would go to these before the pandemic. Right before the pandemic, she was putting on these talks for free in LA.
Yeah.
And she would speak from the podium for about 45
heard
minutes. And then
that.
afterwards, she'd go in the crowd and go with the microphone and
Yeah.
answer questions. And this lady went and asked her, she said, my boyfriend is a narcissist and blah, blah. She went on to try to talk more. And Marianne shut her down for a second, said, listen,
Good.
before you
label.
him a narcissist, a lot of people can say that I'm a narcissist. A lot of
Yeah.
people can say that you're a narcissist.
I have days where I'm a narcissist.
If your boyfriend is a narcissist,
yeah.
and it's one thing if he's clinically diagnosed with narcissism,
Right.
as opposed to just calling someone a narcissist because they portray
Yeah, sometimes
narcissistic behaviors.
egotistic.
She said, but she made it sound like if he is a real narcissist,
Right.
you're really dealing with something a
Right.
lot more than that. But
Yeah,
but then
much more serious.
So with that said, I think that especially in this day and age,
I know.
with this digital,
Everybody's narcissistic.
I mean, come on,
Everybody is.
You see it on Facebook.
We all
You see
are.
it.
Yeah.
We all in some different ways. We have a lot of
Yeah.
narcissistic
We all have
traits.
it. Yeah.
Even quiet people
Yeah.
that sometimes
Yeah. I mean, if you just go to the root, Narcissus and the story of Narcissus in the Greek mythology
Right.
is just falling in love with his own reflection
Right.
in the water. That's how it starts.
Right.
And so is this not narcissistic? Like I'm
Right here.
full blown narcissist, you and I. We got cameras all up in here and we're recording ourselves because we're so fabulous. Yeah. And I do, a lot of social media like you and things like that. And, a lot of times when I talk, I hear myself and go, oh my God, I sound like one of them, right?
Right.
I'd love us to get back to it's okay to feel good about yourself and speak highly of yourself.
Sure.
Because that's recovery for the codependent.
Mm-hmm.
The codependent comes from minimizing themselves, marginalizing themselves, always saying they're less than what they really are because they don't want to be show-offy. I think they need to be they could learn something a little bit from the narcissist. And sometimes it's self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you came from the deep-rooted wounding that you never felt enough and you get around somebody that feels totally and completely, utterly whole within themselves, and I think that's my husband, and I think that's why it annoys me, is I think he has that. And I think he's always had it.
Yeah.
So then it comes off as arrogance or narcissistic, to use the word again.
Yeah.
And really, it's an incredible comfortability being in your own skin. And how wonderful that is. You know,
Right.
how many years you or I spent struggling to just be okay,
Right.
like
The
with yourself.
The inadequacies, the insecurities, all of that stuff. To be able to, and I think as we
And
get
so-
older in age too,
Yeah.
based off of life experience and working through
Yeah.
things, we become more and more comfortable, and we realize life
absolutely.
is so
it does
short.
take time.
It does take time.
It does take time and wisdom and age, and those things don't always go together. Trust.
No, you're right.
But there's a comfortability there, and certainly, the true narcissistic personality disorder is not dissimilar to a sociopath. They really don't care how you feel.
Right.
It's always
don't give a shit.
self-serving.
Yeah, it's self-serving.
Always self-serving, and there's a lot of gaslighting that goes on.
A lot.
Right.
A lot.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I wanted to, there's a couple more things I want to talk
Sure.
about before we get into your book
Sure.
and the new form of therapy that you've
Oh
been doing.
yes.
So this, I was talking to you about this place. It's a primary mental health facility that I've been sending a lot of
I'm familiar.
clients to.
I'm
They
sure
do-
I know who it is.
They do great work there.
Yeah,
Right.
they do.
And
Yeah.
it's called Story Wellness, and
There you go.
they do
Shameless
narrative
plug, Story
therapy. Just
Wellness.
love them.
Yes, I do. They're wonderful.
Something that I found very
Shout out.
interesting that I haven't heard happen a lot, but I'm sure you've probably experienced and probably within your own facility is
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about you are not your trauma. You're not your story.
Yeah,
You're not your diagnosis sometimes.
absolutely.
There are people that go to that
Always.
place, I've heard, and they have, in a sense, taken on whatever diagnosis they were given,
Yes.
and it becomes their story. And sometimes it becomes their excuse, and sometimes they weaponize with their mental health.
Absolutely.
And so when they get there, and I love the way they work with the client, they like to basically re-diagnose
Absolutely.
and see if perhaps the diagnosis that was given before was accurate. And if it wasn't, perhaps you don't need to be on these types of medications, and let's get you off of all this stuff
Don't
that's
get me started.
debilitating you from actually getting you into the mainstream of life and having more of a soundness of mind,
Yes.
like having that soundness of mind.
Yes.
And so
You're hitting a hot button for me.
oh, I love it. Good. So
It's one of my pet peeves.
expand on it then. Talk about it.
No, I mean, the first thing that triggers my foot's going, my heart, it's because, I was a person and am a person who suffered from depression for many, many years. Depression never became my identity. I'm really shocked how well I hid it that so many people didn't even know, because to me, it was all encompassing whenever I had it and whenever I had episodes of depression. And any and every medication I tried did nothing for me. If anything, it escalated to where if I was suicidal, it made me have a plan. You know
Right.
what I mean? So it elevated and escalated a lot of the symptomologies, which if you read the side effects, it tells you those are the side effects. Why am I going to take something when I'm depressed that might make me more depressed? I mean, it's just shocking to me, but I understand this is where we're at with pharmacology and medically assisted treatment, and we're not quite there yet with what are the better options, because in different research and articles that I've read, it says like antidepressants, for example, are only about 25% effective. So many of us are on it.
Right.
We're not getting better. It's not helping. Now, I was always taught, and we're taught in the therapy circles, you do it in conjunction with therapy. So we really don't know. I'm like, yeah, it's the therapy that's really, really helping. And there might be a placebo effect. And there's those 25%er people that are having a positive effect from that, right? The other thing is pathologizing. So besides dropping a bunch of medications, here's the thing about pathologizing: substance abuse disorders. It is a disorder, by the way. It does fall under mental health.
Right.
People who are addicts and alcoholics often forget that. They're like, oh, I have a mental health issue.
Yeah,
I
no,
go,
you do.
Yeah, you know.
Actually, you've
You're
been
right up there,
you've been
buddy.
using that
You're in the
mental
top
thing to
10.
go and use those drugs.
Right.
Yeah.
And because of the drug addiction, what I have difficulty with is how quickly we introduce. I like the idea of medically assisted treatment to wean and to have a period of creating some stability chemically in the brain. It is absolutely necessary, right?
I like it
But
too.
as you're weaning off and as you're clearing the fog and letting them see things, I'm hesitant about how long we keep people on medication, and that we diagnose them so prematurely, so early, with depression, anxiety, OCD, all of these, bipolar, all of these heavy duty disorders and diagnosis, when they're just shaking out the meth,
newly
the crystal
sober,
meth and
yes.
the marijuana.
Yeah.
I'm like, can you give them a minute
Yeah. Before
and
you
then go back? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think we should
you're just
diagnose.
going to take this guy's word for everything that he's saying right there in the
That's
intake office.
insane.
Yeah.
I don't think we should diagnose them. And again, for insurance purposes and for coverage, we have to give something. I don't think we should tell the client. I think everybody comes in, you have a substance use disorder, period. All the other stuff will shake out. Don't tell them they have depression, they have anxiety, because they do weaponize it. They use it for an excuse not to get up in the morning and go to your treatment.
Right.
And participate in I can't do that because I have social phobia. So therefore I can't sit next to Mary, Mike, and John in the group today. I have this, I have that. And they get lost in it. And I'm like, you already have so much.
Right.
You don't need more. It just it gets me going, because
I'm
I'm
glad
a therapist.
I'm glad you talk on
a
it.
personal level bothers me. And what happened to me, I had doctors throw. My husband was in the room at that time. One doctor threw a prescription at me because she didn't know what to do with me because her meds were not helping me. And I'm in her office and I start stripping. So I was having hot flashes. I was going through menopause, which is, for gangsters only, okay? And I had every symptom of menopause, right? And I'm like, this is not working. And all of a sudden I go into this hot flash and I'm like taking off layers. My husband's in there with me. She would not listen to me. which was very painful because she was a female. My understanding was she was an expert with hormone replacement therapy, which is another form of assisted treatment, right? I had such severe depression and anxiety due to the chemical imbalance in my body from hormones. How is that not true for most addicts and alcoholics?
Right.
They're chemically imbalanced. And so you might be seeing a diagnosis that's not there.
Right.
3 months from now won't be there if you let them shake it out, right? So I go in and I'm asking, and I'm like, I can't take this anymore. I go, I am so depressed, and I'm a therapist, and I'm going in to treat people with depression. And when they start talking about how they want to die, I'm like, yeah, me too. Like, that's what I'm thinking. And then when they had a plan, I'm like, oh, that's a good one. Not that I told the client, I had enough filter. I don't know how, but in my head, I was taking notes, and I'm like, I can't do this. I don't even want to live like this, right? I don't care. I have a husband, I have 2 kids, and I'm like, how do I get out of this party? I want it done. I'd look out the window and go, how do I jump? Because I'm scared of heights, right? I'm like, how do I do it?
Yeah.
I'm scared of taking too many drugs. Like, I had fear keeping me somehow. And the woman goes, well, what do you want? And I go, what do I want? And I go, I don't know. I have a friend, which is hilarious. I have a friend who's a psychiatrist. She recommended Wellbutrin. And she goes, okay, here. She writes it and throws it at me. There's a God in heaven, because the fact that I didn't punch her in the face when she did that, I go, how humiliating that is. And I'm a professional to another professional in essence, and I'm suffering. And you throw a script at me? Fuck you, bitch. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
And I looked at my husband and I thought, I'm going to die, because I thought there's no help for me. Do you know how many clients have felt that way? Sitting in treatment, sitting in therapist's office, sitting in psychiatrist's office going, if you can't help me. I just had a friend who got re-traumatized again at the VA around a medication issue that they wouldn't deal with her on or give her. And she's like, I wound up having to detox off of antidepressants because you wouldn't give me my antidepressants.
Right.
And, you know, having this big fight. And she's like, had I not had therapy under my belt and had done all this work on myself, when I went and sat in that car, she goes, I would have went home, got my gun and killed, you know, she would have killed herself.
Wow.
And that's how I felt in that room that day. And I looked at my husband and I said, I'm going to die, because if I can't get help here and I have to live with this. And then by the grace of God and my husband, you know, who, you know, we're holistic, right? So we'll go into that story in a minute, but he said, get off everything. Cause I was on like 55 supplements plus all the meds and everything. He goes, get off everything and just let your body settle, and it'll figure it out. You know, just go to 0. And I did. And not that I was okay, but I'm like, I can't be any worse. I can't be any worse. And so the whole holistic thing, I could do a whole other thing about that, is when my husband and I started Harmony Heals, it was Harmony of Body, Mind, and Spirit Counseling Center. And it was that because we're avid exercise. I've been exercising since I'm 14. Do you know why? Because a severe depression drove me to run out my door. I couldn't drink like my brother. I hadn't picked up that. And so I didn't know how to get out of my head. So one day I opened the door and I start running, Pej. And it saved me, because I had never felt better. And from that day on, I kept running. That was my therapy. I didn't have parents telling me to go to therapy. Nobody knew what I was suffering with.
Got the endorphins going.
I didn't even know. Yeah, I got the endorphins. Neurotransmitters are going off. And I'm like, I can feel better by doing this good, healthy thing. And so I do this, right? So that's how I learned. And I studied about breathing and meditation, all this stuff. My husband does the same thing.
Right.
He's a martial artist. I'm a martial artist. Like, we did all the things to help ourselves feel
Love
better.
it.
And we knew it worked. So we put it in our center. So when we were Harmony of Body, Mind, and Spirit, nobody was holistic.
Right.
It was 35 years ago.
Right.
Now everybody and their mother's holistic. And you've got a sound bath, and you got a breath work, and you got a little shaman, and God bless you, you're holistic, right?
Yes.
For us, it meant heal the whole person through all, you know, as they do in these circles and the 12-step programs, right? It's mind, body, and spirit.
Naturally.
Mind, body, and spirit. You've got to heal all of these parts of yourself. You can't just take one. And everything works. There's no one way. Everything works. Add in what works for you. It's like a chicken soup of healing, right? Maybe you can't, I can't do meditation, but I can do yoga, and I can listen to music. That's my meditation. I can walk, I can hike, I can run. These are that's another form of meditation. I can take a breath and one breath is meditation. So, it doesn't have to look like what it looks like for anybody else, but there's lots of ways of self-healing that are not medications and are not
Question.
even therapy.
Then with that said, and just real quick, I want to slip this one
Not
in
that
there.
I'm against therapy. I'm totally pro-therapy.
You've seen microdosing psilocybin.
Oh, God, yes.
and-
A whole other podcast.
Would that fall into the category of medication-assisted treatment also?
Yeah, it is going to fall there. And it fell there back in the 60s and the 70s.
And ketamine.
And it's going to come back, right?
I
And
mean,
now
it is
like,
back.
It is back.
It's being treated.
But even more so.
Okay. Do
on
you
a bigger
believe that
scale.
it's effective if it's short term or if it serves its purpose for the overcoming of the depression in that time?
I believe that under the proper care of a licensed professional who understands the chemistry of the medication that they're giving you and is there to assist you, that it can be effective with certain diagnoses. And so depression being one of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
Tell
It
us.
scares me for addicts and alcoholics.
It does me
to
too,
be
because
told,
I have seen.
get this to feel better, because sometimes you don't feel better till you got 2 or 3 years sober under your belt, folks. Okay.
Right.
And so if you jump into this prior to that, I feel it, pain and pleasure sit right next to each other in the brain. Okay. And the neural pathways of the brain, they're next to each other, which is why I think sadomasochism works for a lot of people. Okay. And that's why borderline personality and codependent relationships work for a long period of time, because pain and pleasure, we confuse them. Right. So this feels similar to that for me. If the addict is in pain and all of a sudden you introduce ketamine, do you think they're not going to remember what it felt like the first time they took an opiate?
Oh, for
Or
sure.
the first time they hit a pipe?
Sure.
So they're going to go, hey,
The beast
I can
is
still do
unleashed.
that.
Yes.
I can still do that.
Yeah.
So that scares me. Just like we said forever, that marijuana isn't a gateway drug. Yes, it is. It always has been. And everybody always knew that, except the people diagnosing, apparently.
Right.
But yes, it is. So I feel like that's another gateway drug
We're on
that
the
they're
same
going to
page,
get into
Gina.
treatment about it. And God help them, they're going to wind up stuck in the cycle of addiction again. Now, I've seen it in a handful of people, very effective, that had very long-term recovery. And I'm talking long-term double-digit recovery, where they had a sponsor and a program, and they told their therapist, and everybody knew that they were going to go in and get 3 ketamine treatments or whatever, and it was short-lived and whatever, and it was effective for them with a severe episode of depression again.
I get that.
Yeah.
And
So,
I believe that.
again, it's like the individual, right? We can't just blanketly say this fixes everything now. I hate that. I hate that concept.
Right there with
Pitching it like that. I'm not buying it. And the microdosing too. I'm not buying it. The whole psychedelic thing, I have a really hard time with. I understand a sober person who's never had an issue with a substance, having an experience that's an awakening experience and not feeling the need to go back. I can't picture an addict having a wonderful high experience of being high, lucid, and people are co-signing it, that they wouldn't want to do it over and over and over and over and over.
Right. And it's happened.
just very hard
I've
for me to
watched
picture.
some
Of
addicts do that,
course
and
you
they go like off the Richter. So
Of course, yeah. Besides the introduction with someone who has a predisposition to schizophrenia, and you introduce these substances, which are known to activate, where you have the, and I'm sorry, I'm not the physician that can give you, I've studied and I've read, but I can't give you the lingo. This is Gina lingo for this, right? How the brain works is it's lying dormant. So some people have a predisposition for schizophrenia and it just hasn't woken up yet.
right.
Just like if the addict never picks up, right? And so all of a sudden you give them something that expands their mind and you're activating that gene and the potential for them to have a mental health issue, which we've seen with many clients who go out, like with crystal meth, for example.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden we have a schizophrenic on our hands.
I see it all the time.
Scary.
It's very scary. Tell us about your books.
Oh, I would love to. So this is very interesting. So both of these books came out of my cancer. And I don't think I mentioned that in the books, but the truth is when I got diagnosed with cancer and I started asking that question, why not me? I started asking, why don't you write? I started asking lots of things. Why don't you speak publicly? Why don't you have a podcast? I have a radio show, but not a podcast yet.
She has a radio
It's a
show
yet.
that she had me on once, and I broke an
Yes.
FCC law by
did.
dropping an
said
S-bomb,
shit.
not an F-bomb.
He did. This was the kindest, most gentle word he could have used, and we got away with
even
it.
know that
So
one
we're
slipped
happy
out.
about that. Yeah, it's KOCI 101.5 FM. Shameless plug for them.
Yes.
The recovery show that I'm on Thursday nights. So when I got diagnosed with my cancer, my breast cancer, the first time, it opened up something in me. I became tremendously grateful. I was just so open with gratitude for everything. And then it also took away the fears that I have of failing. So any areas, because I had done many things, and I had been successful in many ways, again, not being a narcissist, just tooting my own horn as I did, and I worked really hard at it. But I was afraid to put my words to a book and sign it. It's like, now it's out there. Now people are going to know. And all the codependent stuff. You're a fraud. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so it was a labor of love. And Healing as a Love Story came about because I was helping my friend write her book, and I would contribute chapters. She would call me, and then I would say stuff, and then she had it edited. And the last chapter, it was kind of an interview with me about how I view trauma. And then I said, let's call it Healing as a Love Story. And then she goes, ooh, I like that. I might title that my book. And I go, you can't. That's my book. It came out just like that, very organic. And then I started doing interviews for a YouTube because I was trying to do this, what you're doing right here. And I had our friend Shahab, Shahab, and he was a videographer. And I started doing these videos, and he would ask me about codependency. He asked me about addiction. He asked me about my childhood, all this stuff. And I took every video. For 10 weeks, we did this, and I go, we just wrote my book. So then I took all of the videos.
Content from the video.
Right. And I took it and we edited it, and it became Healing as a Love Story.
I love it.
So
Show your books.
Muy bonito.
Healing is a Love Story.
So the artwork, shameless plug for my daughter, Talia. This is a sketch that she drew from the image that I had in my head. And this was actually one of the very, very, very first gifts that a client gave me. It's a statue that sits in my office that I adore. It has a lot of meaning to me. It's a mother and a child. It's healing the inner child. It has all of the symbolism of it. So my daughter sketched it.
And it says right there, re-imaging trauma.
Yeah, reimagining trauma is the tagline, because what if everything that ever happened to you, every bad, horrific, I don't care, it's a shooting, it's a typhoon, it's a rape, it's sexual abuse, it's addiction, and you took every single bad thing and you looked at and you said, when I went through that bad thing, it was God, the universe, Buddha, whatever you want to call it, opening the door for me to understand myself on a deeper level that I could have never had I not gone through that trauma. And because of it, now I am more resilient. I will be my greater self. And I go, what if you looked at trauma like that? Instead of it's a catastrophic event that you witnessed that caused you pain and harm and you have all these symptoms. That's all true. And I would never minimize being raped, being held at gunpoint, murder, whatever it is, whatever your trauma story is, your parents being abusive. But what if you spun it and said, there's something so powerful in me and such a beautiful purpose that I have on this earth that I had to go through that struggle to know it, to know myself more fully so that I could become that more self-actualized, as they say in therapy, right? And so that became a thing for me because that's how I understood my trauma.
Right.
Because you don't want to get stuck in it. You don't want to get stuck in your past. You want to understand it and you want to grow beyond it. And sometimes by giving the labels, I have PTSD, by calling I'm a sexual abuse survivor and constantly repeating it, you're keeping it there when there's so much more to you than that. That happened to you. It was horrific. It will never be okay, but you're okay. And you don't live there, you live here. The fact you got on the other side of that means nobody got anything over on you. As long as you're breathing and living, that's what happens, especially with sexual abuse survivors, that they stay so stuck in the anger and the hurt. It's devastating when somebody violates you in that way. Absolutely.
That they never move forward.
There's no changing that, but they get stuck in that and it colors all their relationships. You're so much more than that moment and that person. And maybe that person has also healed. God help them. Maybe they have also healed. Most likely they were a trauma survivor and they repeated the pattern, which is so unfortunate.
Yes.
But you don't have to stay there with them in that and give that power when there's so much more to you than that. That's healing as a love story. And it takes you not just through that, but anything that you're struggling with, I identify it in really simple layman's terms. It's like you're having a conversation with me. It's not clinical, like,
Right.
you know, and the transference and countertransference
Yeah.
and the girl and your ego and all that, you know, I just tell you like it is.
Yeah.
And I say, look, try this. And if you do this in this way, you can change, because all of that staying stuck changes how you dialogue with yourself, and how you dialogue with yourself is everything. Because the final chapter is healing as a love story, is falling in love with yourself, and not like Narcissus in the pond.
Yeah.
It's, I love myself enough today to be everything that I imagined myself to be. And I'm not going to stop being because everyone else told me it wasn't possible for me. Every abuse colored my version of myself, and I'm not going to look through that lens anymore. That's the final chapter of the book. And it's whether it's an abusive relationship, whether it's you staying stuck in your head and not writing a book or not starting a new career, it's how you're staying stuck in life. I just walk you through it. You don't even have to have a major identified trauma to identify with how you can walk through something that you're struggling with right now.
Love
and
it.
understanding it from this reimagining lens, and it shifts it for you.
And what is that book?
Pearls of Wisdom, Affirmations for Daily Living is also my daughter's sketch. I envisioned that. I was having a moment of picturing myself. I always thought if I was reincarnated, I'd live sometime in the 1800s or 1900s in Paris, apparently, having a cup of coffee.
Yes.
And so she drew that for me. But what came about this was this. My fear of writing was taking, you know, I always put inspirational stuff on my Facebook. So I'm on Facebook, Insta, TikTok. What else do we got? X, all the things.
Yes.
And it's at Gina Tabrizy. You can find me easily, or Ask Gina, because I go by that Ask Gina.
Yeah.
So I said, I was so scared to write. And then one day I went, you write something every single day on Facebook.
Right.
So again, I took things that I wrote, pieces that were inspirational. It's so, like, you could read this in, 10 minutes, probably 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So what I do is I flip it and I open it. And that's how you should use affirmation books, I think, other than the people that are more type A than I am and go, 1 through 300 and start like on this date and all that. I'm not organized enough. So, like, for example, this says, which is so appropriate to what we're talking about, and I just flipped it. If in your childhood you were made to feel less than, you will seek out relationships that validate this. Drugs and alcohol will help you choose the worst relationships of your life.
Wow.
Right? So it's just sharing or whatever. And so it helped me by putting in this book and pretending like I didn't really write it. I did.
Yeah.
And I put it in the book. It freed me to write Healing, which was much more a labor of love. And it was more personal. It tells my story. I speak about my parents, my brother a bit, in
Love
the
it.
introduction. And there's another one coming out.
What's that one?
It's already written. There's a companion workbook to Healing as a Love Story. So what's cool about it was when I was working at the last treatment center that I was working at, we used this as a group.
Oh, nice.
Okay, and I'm thinking, all right, here's another thing that people don't know. You pay all these facilitators, and that's a ton of money and stuff.
Yeah.
So I had all of my KDACs, which are the chemical dependency counselors,
Yes.
and we had our techs, and we had them all, get copies, and then they read, and I go, look, even if you don't read it, like the longest page is maybe, the longest chapter is maybe 10 pages.
Yeah.
I go, you read it in group with them, and then you do writing exercises
Love it.
afterwards. And it's a group because it talks about CBT, it talks about emotional regulation, it talks about trauma, all of that. It's trauma-informed care, right? So I'm like, why don't I make a workbook? So at that time, I didn't have it. So I have a workbook coming out probably in a month. That's a companion to Healing as a Love Story. So I'm packaging it and going to rehabs. Look, instead of paying somebody to certify this and certify that and thousands of dollars so you can use my method, is get my books, get the workbook, give it to your tech, and have them facilitate a group from it. Piece of cake.
Beautiful.
And I have people doing that, and that's where I got the idea. They told me, and someone uses this for their DBT group, the Pearls of Wisdom, and I was like, brilliant. I had no idea that it could be used for DBT, which is good for borderline personality disorder.
Real quick.
Dialectical behavioral therapy.
That's right. And say what CBT is for those that don't know.
Cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. And the reason you know these are evidence-based, which means somebody did research and said pre and post-treatment, somebody feels better when they use these types of therapy. Insurance companies love this, so everybody has to have CBT and DBT now.
Now you have another form of therapy that's
EIT.
EIT.
So
Expand on that real quick, and then we'll close it out.
Okay, I invented, I'm going to say, organically created a method of therapy that I've now called emotional intuitive therapy. I wrote that manual last summer. I had a pilot of 6 clinicians that I've been practicing on for months, them practicing on clients now for months. I train them. And it's going to be a certified method, much like an EMDR would be, where you go in and you do 2 weekends and then you get a certificate in this particular therapy. Because I'm a hypnotherapist, certified in EMDR, certified in psychodrama. I'm a psychodrama director, and I was trained cognitive, I was trained psychodynamic, and I was trained Jungian Freudian, so psychoanalytic. So I just drew from everything I knew, and one of the greatest healing experience I had was 1, psychodrama, and 2 was inner child work. So I incorporated it in a 9-step method with clients, particularly who have difficulty accessing emotions, which addicts and alcoholics can have great difficulty doing this.
Yes.
Right? I don't feel anything anymore. I just don't feel. I don't feel because I haven't been feeling for 20 years. They think they don't feel. I go, no. You feel.
Yeah.
You just ignore, and you're not reading the signals like the red flags and the green flags anymore. You're just ignoring those signals. It's right there. So the 9-step method is also, it's not psychosomatic, because that means it's a problem. Somatic, like a somatic experiencing. It's going into the body, noticing and focusing on an area. And then I do a whole visual around what does it look like? What shape does it have? If it had a color, if it could move, if it could make a sound. For people who go, I'm not feeling anything. And they're like, I have a pit in my stomach. Well, describe the pit. So it takes you into the symbolic imagery, so it's not as threatening to go, you're sad, They're like, I don't know what I'm feeling. And then all of a sudden they have this image. Well, if the image could speak, which is very Jungian, what would it say to you? It'd say, shut up. Oh, really? You sound angry. Now we have an emotion. So you help them start to identify in a very different way the emotion. Then you help them release it, actually out loud, start to speak to it. Okay, if that was a person, then who would it be? Because it always almost goes back to, I'm so sorry, mommy and daddy. Almost always. It'll go back to the last relationship, and then I go take it further back. So I do something they call pattern tracing. Learn what is this thing feeling? What is it saying to you? So now you're identifying CBT, the cognitive restructuring, and CBT is about understanding what the negative belief is. EMDR does that as well.
Yes.
And so it's like, what's the negative belief? Oh, I'm a piece of shit. Okay, let's trace that back. When was the first time you heard that? Oh, Jesus, my dad used to say, okay, that pit in your stomach is your dad. And now we're going to address your dad. Pretend your dad's here. Now it's psychodrama, but with one person, you don't got all the parts. I just put my hand up and I'm like, that's your dad. So if your dad were here and you were feeling that feeling, what would you say to your dad? With no fear, nothing's going to happen to you. He can't take it away. And then they act it out in a sense, but just sitting in their chair, just verbally acting it out. F you, whatever, you hurt me. I can't stand you. You made me feel like a piece of shit, whatever, until they get to a positive. Because anytime you release the emotion, which is why EMDR works, there's this catharsis that happens. There's this buildup of this painful experience you're having. You're thinking about your trauma, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, and you have this brilliant aha. Wait a second. That's not my fault. That's your fault, you perv, right?
Yeah.
You did that to me. I didn't do that to myself. I was 9, bro.
Yeah.
And this is the same. It does the same thing. It has the same arc where it's a warm up, and then it's the action, and then it's the resolution phase of psychodrama. This does the same thing. It acts on a bell curve. So now they've identified it. They understand this feeling is attached to a person. It's a negative belief I have. Now I need to reframe it. So then you teach them to say, what would you prefer to believe about yourself? Exact language from EMDR, which I say in the book, and I give credit to all of the therapies that I borrowed from and go, use it. But I just put it in a certain sequence, right? And so after that, it's inner child work. Now I want you to take that, bring it in. I want you to picture the you that you always were, that little child, and bring them in, and now say to them the new positive belief, hold the inner child, and you do a visualization and you close. That's EIT and speed dial right there with you. But it's beautiful. It happened because I had a lot of clients who would get stuck emotionally. They didn't respond to EMDR sometimes. They were too scared to do psychodrama sometimes or all the time. And then this was a way to I had to help them to prime the pump to be able to release the emotion. Because I feel very strongly you can't just do CBT because you can't just talk about the problem and think it's going to go away.
Right.
If you don't experience an organic change in the body that feels that you release the grief, the anger, the shame, the hurt, the guilt, those emotions need expression. You can't sit on them and you can't talk yourself out of them. So by having that catharsis, you're way closer to having relief from and resolving the grief that you have about all of those issues. Then you can move forward. But you can't bypass the emotions and move forward. It doesn't, I know everybody tries to do it, but it doesn't work that way. And that's why short-term therapy with the 5 sessions and all that doesn't work for deep-rooted trauma, in my opinion. Only my opinion. My humble opinion.
I love your humble opinion. And I love that you came on today, and I always love
Thank
hearing you talk. I mean, you covered everything. You know, I
I
told
think
you
so.
early on, I did psychodrama when I was a patient in
Yes.
rehab, and it was a game
It's
changer,
life-changing.
life changing. It created my turning point as a result of doing, because I accidentally hit somebody on a bicycle that died when I was 17, and after doing the psychodrama and reliving the day all the way down to the corpse of the kid that I hit on the bike, I mean, the next day I felt like 1,000 pounds was lifted off my back.
100%.
And it was where I made a decision that I'm doing this 100%. Like, I'm going to help every addict and alcoholic and of every age, race, creed, and color,
Absolutely.
one day at a time for the rest of my life that I can help, that God lets me help.
Right.
Yeah. But, you know, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I think I want to have you on for future episodes for certain other things that we could have expanded on, but because we're
Sure.
limited in time, and I know you got to go get your boy.
Yeah, we got to have lunch.
So if you love this channel, if you like this channel, if you're just getting turned on to this channel, please subscribe. Also push the like button and do us a favor and share this with everybody. We want to try to help anybody and everybody that might be suffering, addicts, alcoholics, mental health, whoever's out there in the universe. Please make sure that they know about us, and you can find me at Pej Interventions on YouTube, as well as Pej's Recovery Corner, which is the podcast. Until next time, love you all.